Bizarre Brain Comics. Hello, hello. Gary here for Bizarre Brain Comics. This is where I like to take a look at some older comics, talk about the characters and creators, and then kind of examine the stories and the art. And keeping with the Halloween theme this time, we are going to take a look at this book right here. It says Adventure into Fear, number 10, featuring the Man-Thing. Ah, yes, Man-Thing. Swamp monster extraordinaire. Let's see. This is from 1972. Let's see what the big book of knowledge has to say about the Man-Thing. Adventure into Fear, number 10, 1972, featuring Man-Thing, written by Gerry Conway. Talked about him before. And art, there's pencils anyway, by Morrow, with inks by Howard Chaykin. Talked a little bit about Howard Chaykin before in War of the Worlds. I've mentioned Morrow, but I haven't talked too much about him. Okay, the Man-Thing is a fictional horror monster character appearing in Marvel Comics. He first appeared in Savage Tales number 1. There's the large black and white magazine format. And he was created by Stan Lee and Roy Thomas, the basic idea, and Gerry Conway and Morrow. He was later featured in a variety of titles, including his own feature in Adventures into Fear. Then later, writer Steve Gerber had a 39-issue run on the character, wherein he created Howard the Duck. Man-Thing is a shambling swamp monster in the Florida Everglades. He is possessed of minimal intelligence, but is of an empathic nature, and senses evil and fear, and his touch burns the flesh of the fearful. So it's kind of creepy, and you might say, sounds a lot like the DC's Swamp Thing, and they are very similar, and they came out about the same time. I covered Swamp Thing last year for Halloween, and I guess Swamp Thing came out just after Man-Thing, but Swamp Thing is better known. And it turns out that at the time, Gerry Conway, co-creator of Man-Thing, and Len Wein, co-creator of Swamp Thing, were roommates at the time that these stories were written. And I guess they had more or less admitted that they had a little bit of cross-contamination there between the two. So they both came up with the same basic origin and concept of the swamp creature. And to my knowledge, the first swamp monster in the comics was the Heap from the 1940s. And the Heap was just a heap. He looked like a walking haystack. But these guys look a lot differently. So, let us take an adventure into fear and see what makes Swamp Thing tick. There, and see what I did there? I even accidentally called him Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing is so much better known. Of course, Swamp Thing has had 2 TV series and actually 3, because one of them was animated. And what was it? I think 3 movies. And, well, Man-Thing has only had one rather poor TV movie made of him. I think it was TV, unless it was direct-to-video. And that I'm not sure. But here you can get a better look at that cover. Cry, monsters! Stop that thing! It's got Bobby! If it takes him into the swamp, it'll kill my son! Oh, very dramatic dialogue and a very action-packed and dramatic cover image by Gray Morrow, who did the interior art. And Gray Morrow is from 1934 to 2001. He's an American illustrator of comics, magazines, and paperback books. And he's, of course, co-creator of Man-Thing for Marvel. And Western vigilante character El Diablo for DC. He attended the Chicago Academy of Fine Arts for a time in '54. And he worked for a time at an art studio and submitted many comic strips to syndicates to no avail, because he wanted to get into comic strips. And moving to New York, he met some young comic artists, which led to doing some romance stories and westerns. And he worked for Al Williamson and Wally Wood doing backgrounds, and then began doing stories for Atlas, that later Marvel, and EC, and he was drafted in '56. Then afterwards he was back to comics, eventually doing in the early '70s paperback book covers, which I've mentioned before and showed you. Yeah, I did. I now I've forgotten the publisher. Was it Ace? I don't think it was Ace. But he did all the covers for the Phantom novels and the Flash Gordon novels from that time, and most, if not all, of the covers for the American versions of the Perry Rhodan novels from the early 70s. And then at the end of the decade and early in the 80s, he did for 2 or 3 years, I don't remember how long it ran, he did the Buck Rogers comic strip, which was tied into the Buck Rogers TV show at that time. And although based, of course, on the original comic strip, which had ceased publication in '67, I think it was. This was a continuation of that, but drew a little bit on the TV show, including having Tweaky in it, the little robot. So that is Gray Morrow. And then also had an assist from Howard Chaykin, presumably doing the inks in here, but he did such a nice job. It looks as if Gray Morrow had done his own inks. Okay, we begin here. And really, there isn't even a title other than Man-Thing. in the story, for the story, because I think this was the introduction of the Man-Thing into the color comics. See a bridge in a forest or a swamp somewhere. Car approaching, someone gets out and throws a baby over the bridge, right into the waiting arms of the Man-Thing. And of course, at this time, the Man-Thing had minimal intelligence. He just kind of worked off of instinct and emotion. And also in the Man-Thing stories, because he couldn't speak, had minimal intelligence, he just basically kind of plodded around through the swamp and got involved with various people and things and events. So most of the stories and the plots revolved around secondary characters, and Man-Thing was just there as a participant, and usually wound up saving the day because he's so big and so strong, and just naturally, without thinking, would do the right thing. Okay, here he looks up, has the baby in arms, looks up at the bridge, and he kind of instinctively knows something's not right, and slowly he begins to remember. And here we have a flashback to his origin from the Savage Tales. He's Ted Sallis, who is a scientist working for the government on some kind of formula. Someone breaks into his lab, which is out in the swamp somewhere, which was just like the origin of the Swamp Thing. Someone spies or whatever try to take his abduct him, take his formula and stuff. While he's trying to get away, he injects himself with the stuff, and then in the chase, his car goes off the road into the swamp, and he apparently dies, but with the muck and mire and the goo and whatever the formula was reacted with his body and turned him into this muck monster, this Swamp Thing, a really horrid looking thing. Looks like he's got some carrots. He's got a carrot for a nose, and he's just basically composed of muck for the most part. And he's kind of instinctively takes the baby to this other house out by the swamp, and even knows enough to, and it's a doctor, even knows enough to, remembers enough on an instinctive level to ring the doorbell, and then he takes off. And the doctor here comes out and sees the baby, and he recognizes the baby. Why, that's Billy Joe's little boy. What on earth, Warren? It's that blasted husband of hers, I'm sure of it. He always hated the child, once threatened he'd kill him if Billy Joe didn't give him up for adoption. So that's what it was. The dad had thrown the baby away because the mother wouldn't give him up. And the Swamp Thing hears all that, and on an instinctive level, he understands. Says, now he understands, and like a kindled fire, that understanding begins to swell, and gradually becomes hate. Then we switch scenes to a kind of a shack out in the swampy area. It's kind of a trashy fella, and his pretty young, deprived wife. Here it is. I told you, Billy Joe, he got sick. I brought him to the Doc Thompson's. To Doc Thompson's. If you hadn't been off at your mother's place, you would have. Oh my gosh! Oh, she's so horrified because her baby is gone. Then they hear something out in the swamp. It sounds like a croc. And there's Swamp Thing as he approaches the shack, because he instinctively knows that this is the villain of the story. But while he's in the swamp, he makes a tempting morsel for an unknowing alligator, which snaps at him, and so Swamp Thing, so strong, quickly dispatches that alligator and then creeps up on the house. Ooh. bunch of, and everyone else creeping up on the house while they're arguing, and he's slugging down whiskey, and he threatens her and says, I'm in no mood for any of your back talk. You understand me? Yes, Hank, I understand you. Like so many abused wives. He gets his gun. He's going to go out and see what all the ruckus is about. Lights up a cigarette. After he's taken a swig of whiskey for some courage, opens the door, and there's Man-Thing standing there, horrifying. Oh, he's terrified. Slams the door shut. Go out the back, Billy Joe. And he smashes through the door. And they run out the back, and he smashes through the back of the house. And he fires at the Man-Thing, but the bullets just pass right through its mucky body. Oh, then the man is down, stumbles. He's down on the ground. Oh, Man-Thing grabs him, and he's so frightened. The chemical reaction causes his flesh to burn. Ah! Then he releases the man, and his face is all burned. And the lady comes up and comforts him, and she says, please, don't hurt us. Don't hurt us anymore, please. And he sees her and turns and shambles off back into the swamp. And there she is, comforting her abuser. It's like so many abused women wind up... That's about all I can say about that. Well, he shambles off into the swamp to be alone and at peace once again. But the baby is safe at the doc's house. Of course, they don't know that yet. Hopefully, she'll come to her senses, realizing what he had done, and leaves him. Well, here is another one, because these were written and produced at the time. And this one, I think, is probably just a little bit earlier, because most of these books were primarily reprint stories, maybe having a reprint books, maybe having a contemporary lead feature, and then backed up with reprint material. This is one. Couldn't have been too far in the past because it has the credits. The Spell of the Sea Witch, written by Al Brodsky, and Jayhawk is the artist with Bill Black as the inker. And of course, Bill Black is later one of the artists of and publisher of AC Comics, dealing primarily with some reprints and classic 40s and 50s stuff. And this is really nicely drawn, and it kind of reminds me of late stage Bill Everett. I like that pirate look right there. And it's ghosty pirates. And all doing the story. And then the last feature is there is something strange about Mr. Jones. And I'm not going to get into the story at all. It's a really nice drawing. This is obviously from the 50s, from the style. I think this is early Don Heck, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but it kind of looks like Don Heck. Like that right there looks like Don Heck's Tony Stark. So it may be. I'm not sure. So that is it. Adventure into Fear with the Man-Thing. And I hope you enjoyed that. Please like, share, subscribe. Leave a comment. And remember, comics are art.